When did building your own PC get so popular? Not just going out and buying a pre-built, but really being able to assemble it yourself and find upgrades in order to improve the computer. When did that get so popular? To answer that question, we're going to have to take a trip down memory lane. And on that journey, we'll also discover how third-party PC component manufacturers were once seen as parasitic and how they changed that perception into becoming the catalyst that ignited the PC building boom. Hey everyone, I'm mryeester, your tech tinkerer. I just got a dog and it just tossed a toy down the stairs. What are you doing? You guys want to see my dog? Oh. This is Deuce, the new Yeester puppy. Hello, buddy. This is actually the first time he's been in this workshop, so I got to keep an eye on him to make sure he doesn't eat any processors. All right, let's make sure you're safe. Say bye, everyone. Okay, and if you're watching this video, then there's a pretty good chance that you've built your own computer, or at the very least have thought a lot about building your own computer. And for good reason, it's a lot of fun. Everything from researching the parts to picking out the specific components that you want in it to the actual purchasing and assembling of the computer is honestly all a blast. And while that's the world that we know and love today, when did the hobby of building computers actually become a thing? Well, join me in taking a trip back to the 1970s. This was the time when the first microprocessor was commercially produced by none other than Intel. That's right, the same company that is actively producing top-of-the-line CPUs started their story over 50 years ago when they produced the Intel 4004. While this was only a 4-bit processor, the amazing thing was that it was built inside of a single chip. And we can even find an advertisement for this microprocessor in a magazine called Electronics News, which was a hobbyist magazine back in the day. And here you can see Intel boldly claiming a new era of integrated electronics, which in this case, the marketing didn't lie. This really was a new era. And looking at this, I actually quite like this old Intel logo. Maybe one day they'll go back to it. The reason the 4004 was so revolutionary was simply due to its size and the fact that it was all in a single chip. Remember that this was the era where computers took up entire rooms. And so the miniaturization of this processor really made the concept of personal computers more of a reality. But remember, we're in the 1970s, so the main use case for computers at this point in time was really calculator devices. And so the motivation to have smaller and more powerful microprocessors was really to have more powerful calculators. And so a mere 5 months after the 4004, Intel releases the 8008. And while this processor was technically clocked slower than the 4004, meaning that it could execute fewer instructions per second, it could process 8 bits of memory at a time as well as could access more RAM, allowing for significant speed improvements across the board compared to its predecessor. And this jump in performance is a big deal and paved the way for, in 1973, the Skelby 8H to be released, which was not only one of the first personal computers that you could buy, it was also one of the first personal computers that you could build yourself. That's right, the Skelby 8H was sold as a kit, which I find fascinating and just goes to show that this whole concept of building your own computer is really as old as personal computers themselves. Here we can see one of the first advertisements for the Skelby 8H, which was released in the March 1974 issue of QST, which was an amateur radio enthusiast magazine. I love that this is marketed as the totally new and very first mini computer, which it is. It sounds like a teenager today designing this ad. But even here, you can see that it was sold as a kit, meaning that they would ship you all of the boards, all of the parts, and you as the end consumer would have to construct it and assemble it all together. And I think this says a lot about the people that were paving the way of personal computers back in the day. These initial consumers of personal computer kits were tech enthusiasts, a lot of them coming from a radio background. Take, for example, where this ad for the Skelby is being placed. It's within a radio enthusiast magazine. And radio hobbyists had the know-how to put things together, to modify things, which goes hand in hand with assembling personal computers. Now, this Skelby 8H computer kit was being sold at, it looks like $440 in 1973. And if we calculate what that value is in today's dollars, we can see that that's around $2.5 grand. So if you had an extra $2.5 grand laying around, you could send a letter to this address and get yourself a computer kit. Now, at this point, the personal computer market is still very immature. These types of computer kits sold in the hundreds of units throughout their lifetime, but it did become clear right off the bat that there was a lot of interest from these enthusiasts. We know that because competition started to enter the market. For example, the Mark 8, which was another PC kit, was released just a few months after the 8H. But to be honest, these types of kits were mere stepping Stones. And it wasn't until 1975 that the first commercially successful PC kit was announced. And that, my friends, was the Altair 8800. Upon release in 1975, this immediately made waves in the PC building space, causing everybody to cancel their Skelby 8H and Mark 8 orders. This Altair 880 was truly a breakthrough in computer building. And again, it was sold as a kit that required people to physically put all the parts together. Here we can see the Altair making an appearance on the front cover of a popular electronics magazine. And again, like the marketing suggests, this really did rival commercial models of other computers. Now, why was this PC kit so revolutionary compared to the last two that I talked about? The main reason for that is that the Altair was built on Intel's newer microchip design, the 8080. Compared to the previous 8008, and I know the names can get a little confusing, the 8080 was around 10 times faster for half the cost, which allowed for leaps and bounds of performance improvements across the board with the Altair. And actually, let's see how much this Altair cost on release. The introduction price for this kit was $439. So basically the same price as the Skelby kit, but you got 10 times the amount of performance. And as a result, the Altair saw immediate success, selling 1,000 units within the first calendar year, which was a crazy number at the time. Another thing to note here, and you can see by these pictures, is that these computers don't have screens. And for that matter, they don't have keyboards or mice as well. And that's because at the time you would interface with computers with either tape or punch cards that would define your inputs, and then you would either get tape printed out or it would show up on LEDs on the computer. So just another indication that we've come a long way since then, but it's really cool to see the roots here. So with the influx of these Altair computer kits that everyone was assembling, what we saw was also a rise in tech tinkering. That's right, similar to the tinkering that these individuals would do on their radios, they started doing the exact same things on these computer kits. It turned out the Altair wasn't perfect. The computer's dynamic memory boards were unreliable. And so a homebrew enthusiast designed, built, and even sold static RAM boards that could improve your experience with the computer. And in fact, you could buy this upgrade for $255 to make your computer that much more reliable. As you can see, this was really the start of having a third party produce and manufacture upgrades to computers. And one consequence of these upgraded RAM kits was that they drew way more power than the default dynamic ones. And so some separate enthusiasts took the task of building an upgraded power supply for the Altair. And while these modifications and upgrades essentially paved the way for these third-party components to be available to customize their PC experience to their own unique needs, the company that built the Altair kit to begin with did not see it the same way. In fact, Ed Roberts, the designer and developer of the Altair, famously described these third-party component manufacturers as parasite companies. That's right, he saw them as siphoning away his customers and riding the success of the Altair. It's kind of crazy how this perspective has shifted in the current PC hardware and component space, where we take for granted that all of this competition actually is a good thing for consumers. When you can buy different brands of RAM or even graphics cards, that helps drive price down and quality up in general. But again, because the market in the 1970s was so immature, these larger companies really looked at these third-party manufacturers as parasites. And hilariously, one of the modders who was manufacturing new power supplies for the Altair actually named his company Parasite Engineering as a jab to Ed's comments, which I find hilarious. Just goes to show that even from day one of PCs, building your own computer was such a core part of the community. And even more importantly, the ability to swap in and out parts from third-party manufacturers is really what helped ignite the entire PC industry in general. And to show why this is the case, let's take a look at some sales numbers from personal computers from 1975 up until around 2000. As you can see, in the infancy of personal computers, there wasn't that many options. And even so, it took 5 years for the entire market to realize 1 million units sold. Fast forwarding to 1980 to 1984, we can see a few companies emerging as potential market leaders. Apple should be pretty familiar to all of you, and something unique about Apple's design choice here was that they actually went with proprietary hardware inside of all of their computers, as opposed to IBM PCs, which used off-the-shelf hardware and software. Over time, this allowed for the emergence of clones, which essentially was these third-party companies being able to come in and sell compatible components. What this allowed for the market, which you can see in the trends here from 1987 to 1990, was that IBM overtook the market. Since consumers were blessed with having so many vendors working on the same compatible platforms, this drove down costs and the amount of options increased the quality across the board. By 2001, it was basically a choice between PCs and Macintoshes, but because PCs had so much more flexibility and so many more vendors that were working specifically on graphics cards or RAMs all in parallel, it allowed for that many more options to occur. So ultimately, we can thank the hobby of building PCs and those individuals who were so intent on tech tinkering for the crazy expansion of the PC market. Something else that I think is interesting is looking at the Google trends of building a computer. And my initial takeaway is that this goes to show that the hobby of building a custom computer has never really died out, at least over the past 20 years. The lowest point in terms of search engine interest was maybe 2009, 2010, maybe due to the financial collapse in 2008. But regardless, across the board, this is a pretty steady trend. Another thing to note is that in 2020, we saw a giant boom in interest in this hobby. Maybe due to people being quarantined and having some time on their hands, maybe due to crypto blowing up. But regardless, it's wonderful to see so many people interested in this hobby that you and I share. My only wish is for the market to be a little bit more accessible. I'm sure there are a lot of you out there who are really into PC building, but simply can't afford all the parts yet, which is totally understandable given the market. But anyway, this was a bit different than my normal videos. I really just wanted to explore PC building and its history with you, and I hope you enjoyed coming along for the ride. If you did, feel free to subscribe for some daily tech tinkering short form content on my TikTok and YouTube shorts, as well as weekly long form content just like this one today. And if you really enjoyed it, you can pick up some Mr. Yeester merchandise on my website, mryeester.com. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you guys next time. See you later.